Good morning, everybody. Welcome to CVC. All of you regular attenders, glad to have you here. Happy New Year. If you are new, I want to extend a special welcome to you. My name is Joe. I'm one of the pastors here. And maybe you're brand new. Maybe this is the first time you've been. Glad to have you here. Maybe you came to Christmas Eve with somebody and you're like, hey, those people aren't that bad or weird. So I'll give it a try again. Or maybe this is part of your, New Year's plan. Like, hey, we need to get back to church regardless of why you're here. We're really glad that you're here. If you're brand new, if you text hello to that number, that'll actually just let us know that you're here. We're not going to bug you. We're not going to call you unexpected or show up on your doorstep, but it's just a way that you can begin to kind of make contact with our church. And then there's an open line of communication if you have more questions or if you want to learn more, if you want to meet some of our staff or know how you can connect. That is a way to do that. And then there's also a QR code on the back of all of your seats. If you click that QR code with your phone, it's going to open up to our link tree that has tons and tons of information about CVC. So if you're questioning anything, you're like, hey, I don't know about fill in the blank, that QR code is going to be the best place to find all of the answers to the questions that you might have. Well, we're in this season, this time of year, right, where people are getting stuck in the snow. If you had to drive somewhere for New Year's Eve, you probably had a long drive home. We had friends out at our house on the east side, and their drive back to Independence took a little over an hour. And as we're thinking about this new series, Unstuck, I was thinking about a situation that happened a couple years ago. I was driving down my road, and there's a guy that lives on my street, and his home and his driveway are down this little incline. And I was driving home one evening, and I see smoke and gravel, and he is stuck in his driveway, and he just has the pedal down, and he is spinning his rear tires. And I'm like, okay, this is not going to work. If he had caught traction, he probably would have shot across the street into the neighbor's house. So I pulled my truck over to the side of the road, and I go, whoa, 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 whoa. I go, do you need some help? And he goes, no, I'm good. I go, are you sure, man? I've got a tow strap in my truck. I can just pull you out. He goes, yeah, you know what, man? That would be great. So I back my truck up. I hook up the tow strap, and I gave very specific instructions. I go, here's all I need you to do. Just put it in neutral, and don't hit the gas. Just I'm gonna rock your car a little bit because it's really dug in there, and then the truck will pull it out. Okay, sounds good. So I get in my truck, I start moving, and then I see his rear wheel spinning. So I stop, I let his car kind of hunker back into the rut, and I get out and I go, hey man, I know you're just trying to help make it go a little faster, but if you get traction while I'm trying to pull you out, you're gonna run right into the back of my truck. So if you wouldn't mind, just don't press the gas. Just leave it in neutral. The truck will do the work. Great. I get back in the truck. He does it again. Now, I'm trying to be Jesus to this man. And in my mind, I'm going, what was not clear? But I get out and I go, hey, man, really? It's going to take a second, but I promise I'll be able to get you out. Just leave it. Just steer, leave it in neutral. He does. I pull the truck out. He goes, thanks, man. We unhook it, and he goes on his way. Now, I mentioned that story because sometimes we can get stuck not only in the snow like that, but we can get stuck in life like that, where something happens in a relationship, our financial situation, maybe it's an addiction that we're battling, maybe there's trouble at work or with our parenting, the list can go on, and often what happens is just like the guy in the driveway, we think, I can get myself out of this, and we put the pedal to the metal, and we end up just spinning ruts in our driveway that make the problem worse. Now, here's what's worse when you're stuck in the snow. What's worse when you're stuck in the snow is when people are watching you be stuck in the snow. You know, when you get the guy that drives by and you kind of, or when you see the curtain in somebody's front door or front window and they're watching you be stuck. That's why when I clearly stopped and said, hey, buddy, do you need help? He said, no, I'm good, right? Because there's a sense of feeling shame in those moments. Like somehow we will tie I got stuck to our identity. I'm an idiot. And the same thing can actually happen in real life when we get stuck in our relationships, in our finances, in our habits, in our addictions, in our emotions, is one, we know that we've made some bad choices, but then everybody else is watching, and it can turn guilt, I made a bad choice, into shame, I am a bad person or a foolish person. And then what happens is we end up in isolation. Because we feel shame, because we feel attacked at the core of who we are, we don't lean into help, we lean away from help. So when people go, hey, you need a little help? You go, no, I'm good. Well, over the next couple weeks, we're gonna be in this series called Unstuck, where we wanna look at how does true transformation happen? How do we actually get unstuck from those moments in life where we feel like we've spun ruts that are so deep that we actually can't get out of them? We're going to look at the life of a man named Peter, or he actually has a couple names. In some portions of the Bible, he'll be referred to as Simon. In other places, he'll be referred to as Peter. Sometimes they combine them and call him Simon Peter. You'll hear me use both of his names. We're talking about the same guy. And Peter is a guy, you may know him because he ends up being one of Jesus' disciples. But today we're going to encounter Peter in a moment where he meets Jesus in a very important moment in his life. See, Peter, as we walk through his life, we're going to learn that he's a man who wrestles with shame. He wrestles with self-worth. He wrestles with pride and fear and purpose. But the wonderful thing about Jesus, like we talked about on Christmas Eve, is Jesus is humble enough to meet Peter right where he is. And he's glorious enough not to leave Peter there. And he's faithful enough to walk with Peter, even though we'll see Peter keeps messing up. And he's just like that with us as well. And so we want to look at how do you really change in 2026? We don't need another New Year's resolution that is gone by the wayside by February. What we're aiming at with this series is true transformation. And so I want to invite you to turn to the book of Luke in your Bibles. If you don't have a Bible, we're going to have the verses on the screen. And if you would like a Bible, we'd be glad to give you one on your way out today. Just talk to any of our staff members and say, hey, Joe said I could have a Bible. And they will gladly give you one for free that you can call your own. 3 points today about how to get unstuck or to begin this process of getting unstuck in those areas where maybe you've got deep ruts in your life. Here's the first one. We get unstuck when we obey Jesus willingly, even when we don't have clarity. So we get unstuck when we obey Jesus willingly, even when we don't have clarity. Luke's Gospel, chapter 5, beginning with verses 1 through 7. On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. And he saw 2 boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the people from the boat. So if you have been here through our Mark series that we did this fall, this will be a scene that you'll recall. Luke here calls it the Lake of Gennesaret. This is the Sea of Galilee. So in Capernaum on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And Peter, along with his brother and some of their fishing partners, had been out fishing all night. That's how you would fish in that part of the world with the tools that they had. They were fishing with nets, and the way they would fish with nets is in the dark, because what would happen is in the evening, the fish will come to the top to feed, and that's a great way for them to get caught in the nets. They've finished their fishing, they're cleaning their nets. Jesus is there teaching on the shore, and there's so many people that he doesn't have room to teach. So he takes Simon Peter's boat, nudges it off from shore a little bit, and kind of uses it as his little floating pulpit. Verse 4, and when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, we toiled all night and took nothing. But at your word, I'll let down the nets." And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. Now, there's one of our elders here. His name's Eric Mendheim, and he has been a pilot for United for quite some time. I called Eric this week, and I said, "Hey, how many flights have you flown?" And he said, about 9,000. I go, "How many miles is that?" He goes, "Oh, millions of miles that I've flown." So imagine that I walk into the cockpit and I go, "Hey, why don't you push these buttons for takeoff today?" Eric would probably look at me like I had three heads. He'd probably go, "Here's an idea. How about you get out of my cockpit and go sit down and put your tray in an upright position and leave me alone?" Right? I have no business telling Eric how to fly an airplane. In much the same way, Peter at this point has been a lifelong fisherman. Jesus grew up as the son of a carpenter, so he was probably a carpenter when he was young, and now he's an itinerant preacher. And Peter at this point probably knew of Jesus. He probably knew that he was gaining a following and that there had been some miracles, that he had healed some people. But you can imagine how Peter might have felt when the guy preaching tells him how to fish. See, again, Peter had been out all night, and he and his fishing partners and his family knew what they were doing. And so when Jesus says, "Hey, why don't you let down your nets for a catch?" he goes, he's kind, but internally, Simon is probably thinking, "I know way more about fishing than you, preacher." And I think that can be how we are with God sometimes. With whatever area it is where we're stuck, we think, "God, I have been working on this. I've been trying. I'm not an idiot. I know some of the ways that I need to fix this problem. I've tried them. They're not working." Now, why would we respond that way to God? Because sometimes God will give us instructions on how to fix things, on how to get unstuck, on how to experience freedom that seem contrary to our natural way of solving the problem. See, the natural way to solve the problem for Peter is try again tomorrow night. not let down the nets in the middle of the day. That doesn't make any strategic sense, and Peter knows it. But Jesus, as he does with Peter, often will do with us. I understand what you're saying. I want you to do it again. I want you to do it my way. So, Simon says, now, we can't read tone. We can't read tone into the Bible. A lot of my questions in heaven are going to be about tone. How did you say that? I sort of read Peter's tone. Now, I've read a lot about Peter. I read his tone to be, okay, we've been doing this all night, but if you want me to put on the nets, I'll throw out the nets. That's kind of how I see it. When Peter calls Jesus master here, the way that it's in the Greek is he's just being polite. He's just saying, sir. So he's trying to be kind to the gentleman. He doesn't obey because it makes sense. He doesn't obey because he feels motivated. Frankly, he's probably pretty tired and they just got finished cleaning up their nets and he's ready to go home and get a good meal and a nap. But he gives the reason. Because you say so, at your word, I'll let down the nets. See, sometimes Jesus asks us to do things his way and they don't make sense to us. Sometimes, in order for you to get unstuck or for me to get unstuck, what Jesus calls us to do is to forgive. And we think, if I forgive, that's dismissing what they did. If I forgive, I'm lessening the harm that they caused. If I forgive, they win. And Jesus might be saying to you, in whatever situation you're in life, I want you to do this my way. And that's how you're going to experience true freedom. Sometimes Jesus calls us not to hide our struggle, which is what seems safe, but to bring that struggle out into the light. I want you to tell somebody about your lust problem. I want you to tell somebody about the fact that you have been messing around on your spouse. I want you to tell somebody that you have a problem with gambling or alcohol. I want you to bring whatever it is that you've been hiding out to the light. And we think, I've been out fishing all night. That is not going to work. We think if I tell somebody, all that's going to come are the negative consequences. But Jesus might be saying to you, I want you to do it my way. And it might not be easy, but I want you to trust me with the outcomes. Sometimes he calls us to choose humility, to stop proving that we're right, to stop defending our ego, maybe to apologize and reconcile and listen. And we think, if I do that, I'm going to look weak. I'll never get ahead at work if I choose that pathway. And Jesus is saying, if you want to truly get unstuck, I need you to do things my way. Maybe for you, it's that Jesus is calling you to slow down. And you're looking at your to-do list and the calendar with your children and the things you have to do at work, and you think, slow down. Ha ha! Yeah, right, Lord. It seems lazy. It feels irresponsible. But you know that you're stuck in this rat race. And he might be saying, I want you to do it my way. And that's how you're going to get unstuck. God might be guiding you to do things his way, that don't seem to make sense to you, and you might, like Peter, experience a miracle. It might not be painless. I'm just going to be honest with you. Getting unstuck is rarely easy, but it can produce true, lasting freedom. See, Peter begrudgingly does it Jesus' way. That's curious to me. Peter doesn't have a good attitude about it. Peter goes, oh, okay. We've tried everything. I guess we'll do it your way. And what happens? Miracles happen. The nets fill instantly. And it's very, very clear to anybody who's standing there that day and anybody who's reading this recollection of the story that Jesus didn't just happen upon some really good fishing advice that morning. This is a miracle, far more. Jesus produces far more than Peter and his friends ever could imagine, so much that the nets are breaking. They have to call another boat to come in. They're filling up both of the boats so significantly that both of the boats begin to sink. And this is what Jesus invites us into, true, miraculous, supernatural transformation that we cannot produce on our own. But we are so prone, aren't we, to go, no, I'm good. And in 2026, the question is, are you going to keep spinning the wheels, trying to fix it on your own, or are you going to invite Jesus in and do it his way? Now, we would think this is the moment to celebrate. This is pretty exciting, right? We got all of these fish. But can you imagine maybe how Peter feels in this moment? He maybe feels a little bit insignificant. He maybe feels a little bit of guilt for speaking to this man the way that he did. And he probably is actually feeling a good bit of shame. See, shame, again, is tied to our identity. Peter probably doesn't feel I probably shouldn't have spoken to the guy this way. He probably feels like, I'm a bad fisherman. But not only that, Peter begins to feel, I'm a bad human being, beyond repair. See, something extraordinary happens in this moment. Where Peter doesn't rejoice, he actually slinks into this moment of self-realization. But then he sort of takes that to the nth degree, and he realizes some things about himself so significantly that he feels like Jesus can't be close to him because he's so dirty. So we get unstuck when we obey Jesus willingly, even when we don't have clarity. We also get unstuck when seeing Jesus clearly helps us see ourselves honestly. When seeing Jesus clearly helps us see ourselves honestly. Verse 8. But when Simon Peter saw it, namely all of the fish, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. Now, I want you to see three things here. First, Peter gains an interesting insight into his heart, and it's right insight. He says, I am a sinful man. So Peter somehow, as he encounters the miraculous, the divine in this moment, begins to see the pride and the arrogance and the self-protection that had been evident in not only his previous response to Jesus, but in his life. And this is a right response. It is okay to say to Jesus and to recognize, I am a sinful, broken person. That's an important step to being unstuck. You know, there are YouTube videos, a lot of videos out there where you see kind of traveling preachers or evangelists or apologists. And one of the questions that they ask people is, on a scale from 1 to 10, how confident are you that you're going to go to heaven when you die? And most people kind of land within the range of 6 to 8. Now, and when the person asks, why do you think that? What's the typical answer that they give? Yeah, I'm a pretty good person. Thinking that we're pretty good is an obstacle to getting unstuck. Because when you think you're pretty good, you think you can handle it on your own. You think you can get yourselves out of the ruts. This is what causes people, when the guy drives by with the pickup truck, to say, no, I'm good, thank you so much. But where Peter gets it wrong, he gets it right by saying, I'm a sinful man. He gets it wrong when he says, depart from me because I'm a sinful man. See, here's the connection of recognizing who he really is really good, really healthy, really helpful. The problem is that Peter has a misunderstanding about himself, and he has a misunderstanding about Jesus. And we often share those same misunderstandings. We don't think that we're as sinful and bad as we really are. And we think if God really knew how bad or sinful or saw the deep, dark parts of our heart, that he wouldn't want to be around us. And we need to flip both of those in order to truly get unstuck. We need to see ourselves for who we really are. We all have a serious sin problem. Wanting ourselves to be in charge, at the center of life, doing things our way instead of God's. But we also need to understand that our sin does not repel Jesus, it actually invites him in. Because he is the only one that can actually fix our sin problem in any meaningful, permanent way that provides freedom. Peter's eyes are opened to the truth, and his confidence evaporates. His competence as a fisherman feels small. His pride melts, and he says, you've got to get away from me because someone like you should not be hanging around someone like me. See, real transformation doesn't begin with more effort, doesn't begin with more trying, doesn't begin with another self-help book or another podcast or another conference or another trip to the counselor. Nothing wrong with any of those things. I want to be very, very clear. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. But all of those things are only as helpful in as much as they point you to Jesus, who is the ultimate solution. See, that's what these, when Becca talks about the workshops, that's what our workshops do. That's what Boundaries is going to do. In your familial issues, how do we point one another to Jesus? Celebrate recovery. Same thing with addictions. How do we actually point one another to Jesus, recognizing our sinfulness and our brokenness and coming to him? Single moms group, there can be some shame tied there, or divorce. If divorce is one of the reasons maybe that you're single, divorce care, there can be shame tied there. There can be shame tied to our parenting, can there not? We don't just think, well, I messed up today. We can think, I'm a terrible parent, or I'm a terrible spouse. And so all of our workshops here, when Becca talks about them, they're not bad things. They're only as helpful in as much as they point us to Jesus. See, remember that opening story about the guy who was stuck in his driveway? I didn't need him to keep pressing the gas. Him continuing to press the gas pedal was just causing more problems. What I needed him to do is to just have that moment where he goes, yeah, you know what, man, you're right. I do need some help. And just put it in neutral for a minute so that I could pull him out. This is where so many people stay stuck because they have a misunderstanding of themselves and a misunderstanding about Jesus. We need to recognize that we do have a sin problem. We also need to recognize that that sin problem doesn't repel Jesus, it invites him. And that's what we're going to see here in this third point. Peter says the same thing that shame always says, stay away from me. But that's not going to happen. Jesus is going to lean in. And so we get unstuck first when we obey Jesus willingly, even when we don't have clarity. We get unstuck when seeing Jesus clearly helps us see ourselves honestly. And finally, we get unstuck when Jesus invites us to live life purposefully. When Jesus invites us to live life purposefully. Look with me at the second half of verse 10. And Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men. And when they had brought the boats to land, they left everything and followed him. Now, imagine the scene again. The nets are full. Peter feels like a failure as a fisherman, and his heart has been exposed, so he feels like a failure as a man, period. He recognizes and sees his sinfulness before. I don't know that he fully understands who Jesus is, but he knows that he's no ordinary man. He shifts from calling him sir to calling him Lord. And he has said, I am a sinful man. I'm a dirty man. I'm a broken man. I'm a screwed up man. So get away from me. You don't want to be seen with me. And what's the first word that Jesus speaks into Peter? He says, Peter, don't be afraid. He could have said 100 things. I think sometimes we superimpose bad parenting onto God. I think sometimes we superimpose bad friendships, the way that other people have responded to us, the way that the world works, and we think wrongly to ourselves, this is how God's going to respond to me. How many of you maybe you were the recipient of this when you were young, or maybe parents, you've made this mistake of giving a child guidance and wisdom. I'd like you to do it my way instead of your way. And when they eventually do, you go, told you so. If you would have just done it my way to begin with, we wouldn't be in this mess. I think that's how we think Jesus is going to respond. Maybe that's how Peter thinks he's going to respond. But Jesus speaks into his fear. Man, I can't even imagine the depth of fear that Peter is feeling about his identity as a fisherman, his family as a man, and he's standing before this guy who is somehow supernatural and miraculous. Maybe Peter's even leaning in to believe that he is the anointed one of God, the Messiah. You don't want to be around me. And Jesus says, Peter, you don't need to be afraid. That's such a powerful word, and we fly right over it. Because right now, right, wherever you are, wherever you're stuck, wherever there's sin in your life and brokenness in your life, whatever needs to be brought out to the light, whatever things need to happen Jesus' way instead of your way, what happens is there is great fear in doing things Jesus' way, because it typically means that the whole of our lives and the whole of our hearts are going to be exposed. And we might lose a relationship. We might lose a little bit of pride. We might lose a little bit of our good name in the community. We might lose a job. There can be a lot of loss with finally doing things Jesus' way, and it's terrifying. But it's the only thing, it's the only way that leads to true freedom, to be truly unstuck. And Jesus' word into your life, as you're sitting there, right? Maybe you're going, whoo, actually really dealing with this. Allowing Jesus to really deal with this might be one of the hardest things that I've ever done. And his word to you is, don't be afraid. Oh, what a word into Peter's heart. Don't be afraid. Well, the natural response is, well, why should I not be afraid, Jesus? And he says, from now on, you will be catching men. Now, maybe Peter doesn't fully understand exactly what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is going to invite him into his ministry. But here's what Jesus is saying. I still have a plan and a purpose for your life. See, part of the fear not only comes from our hearts or our sin being exposed, the consequences in our community and in our families, but the second level of fear comes from thinking, if this gets out, if I really allow Jesus to heal and restore, if I bring this thing out into the life, into the light, I'm not sure how I'll ever regain an ability to be used in any meaningful way. My reputation will be so sullied and so broken that God could surely never use a guy or gal like me in his kingdom. And Jesus says to Peter, as he says to you and to me, don't be afraid. I still have plans for you. He doesn't dismiss the sin. He doesn't go, oh, get up, Peter, no big deal. He doesn't do that. Neither does he go, yeah, you're right, get away from me. He invites Peter in to the process of being transformed for the purpose that God has for his life. And God is inviting you into the same thing in 2026. My hope is that you're not interested in just another New Year's resolution that lasts for a couple months, and by the time you get to June, you go, whatever. My hope is that you will lean in like Peter does, leaves everything, and follows Jesus. Jesus speaks calm into Peter's fear and purpose into his shame. He says to Peter, like he says to you, I know exactly who you are. I see all the weakness. I know you better than you know you. And that does not disqualify you from being a part of my family. Let me pull you out of the rut. And let me set you free to be and to do who I actually created you to be. Imagine, let's go back to the driveway on Fronic Drive. Imagine I pull this guy out of the ditch, and there's his car, and it's on asphalt, it has traction, and he gets out of the car, puts his keys in his pocket, and walks into the house. I might go, what's happening? I thought you said you were going to the store. Yeah, I am, man, but I don't think I'm worthy to be driving that car anymore. See, that's what shame can do to us. No, he didn't. He got in the car, and he drove and went on to do what he had planned to do. So getting unstuck isn't easy. It's not painless, but it frees us up to be and to do what God has called us to do, to leave everything and follow him. And so my question for you is, do you really want to get unstuck from whatever that thing is that is weighing you down in 2026? Is your response to the word this morning going to be, no, I'm good? Or will it be, yeah, I could really use some help? See, when I told you about the man's response, when I told you that I stopped and I said, hey, you need some help? And he goes, no, I'm good. All of you laughed. Why? Because it's as clear as day that the man needs help. And there may be people looking at your life and even praying for you, and they're just waiting for you to recognize, yeah, I could really use some help. And Jesus is humble enough to meet you right where you are. And he's glorious enough not to leave you there. And he's faithful enough to walk with you every step of the way. See, as we continue to walk through this series, guess what's going to happen? Peter's going to mess up again. And then in week 3, guess what's going to happen? Peter's going to mess up again. And this process will actually rinse and repeat. Jesus will restore Peter, and he'll send him back out into purposeful ministry. And in our last week of this series, we're actually going to get to see Peter later in life and see what God has done in and through him. And my hope is that this series would be the beginning of that process for you. So I have 2 questions for you to consider today as you are driving home or around the dinner table, or perhaps you might pull them out later this week and have a conversation with the Lord or with someone that you trust and love. Here they are. The first one, where in my life am I still pressing the gas? Trying harder, trying to manage the outcome, trying to prove myself, instead of honestly kneeling before Jesus and trusting his strength. Number 2, if Jesus already knows my weakness and still moves toward me, not away from me, what purpose for my life have I been avoiding, or do I need to pray about in order to gain clarity? See, Jesus doesn't send Peter back to just fishing. He launches him into a different type of fishing. And there may be dreams and hopes and purposes that you had hoped that God would have for your life. And because of that besetting sin, because of that area where you're stuck, you've lost all hope that those could ever be realized. And maybe today you need to begin to think and pray about how Jesus might relaunch you into greater purpose. So those are my 2 questions for you to go home with today. Again, I hope that you'll come back next week as we continue following Peter in this journey. And my hope is that you'll bring to the Lord whatever area it is where you're stuck, because he is the only one that can truly bring life and freedom and set you off on real purpose for your life. Let's pray. Father, as I prayed in the previous service, there are, 500 people in this room, and probably thousands of areas where people are stuck. And there's a battle going on in hearts and minds right now. The Bible tells about this. Paul writes about it in the book of Galatians. He says, there's a battle inside of us between our flesh, what we want to do, and the Spirit of God, what we ought to do. So, Father, I pray that today many would yield to the Spirit. Many would hear your word and not just like the man in the driveway say, no, I'm good, but would truly invite you in to help them get unstuck. That you would calm their fears and that you would give them purpose. You are the God who fills fish with, who fills nets with fish in the middle of the day. You are the God who touches people with leprosy and they're clean. You are the God who speaks into graves and dead people's hearts start to beat again and they walk out. And so nothing that we are carrying, no area where we are stuck is beyond your ability. Give us humility today to see ourselves as we truly are and you as you truly are. May you bring freedom, hope, and new life. We ask this in Jesus' powerful name. Amen.